Welcome to This Explainer. I'm pumped you're here. Let's jump right in. We're taking the TOGAF standard, something that usually requires a massive glossary, and turning it into a clear, actionable map. If you've ever stared at this framework and felt totally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of terminology, you are in the exact right place. Think of enterprise architecture, kind of like building a massive functioning city. Today we're going to decode all that complex terminology using that exact blueprint metaphor.
So how do you map the DNA of a complex enterprise? I mean, before we can pour the concrete for our skyscrapers or lay the roads for our digital city, we absolutely have to understand the language of the blueprints. And that is exactly what this framework gives us.
Okay, let's map out our journey. We'll start by defining the enterprise architecture itself. Then we'll look at the core engine, known as the ADM. After that, we'll break down the 4 architecture domains, navigate through states, gaps, and roadmaps, and finally, get hands-on with building blocks and artifacts.
Right. Part 1, Defining the Enterprise Architecture. Let's start at the macro level. These are the foundational concepts that act as the bedrock for everything else we're covering today.
In the standard, an enterprise is the highest level of description of an organization. It covers all its missions and functions. Going back to our metaphor, the enterprise is our sprawling city. It's the massive, overarching entity, sometimes even spanning multiple sub-organizations, that we are trying to organize, optimize, and really future-proof.
Now, if the enterprise is the city, then architecture is our master blueprint. It's the structure of the components, their interrelationships, and the guidelines governing their design. Basically, it's the organized logic that stops our sprawling city from turning into complete, unmanageable chaos.
And look at this official definition for a second. There is an absolutely vital concept in here. It says architecture is about the governing principles for the realization and evolution of this entity. Notice that word, evolution. Architecture is not just a static picture you frame and hang on a wall. It's a dynamic set of rules for how the entity actually grows, shifts, and adapts over time.
So if architecture is about continuous evolution, what actually drives that change? Well, that brings us to part 2, the core engine.
The crucial piece here is the Architecture Development Method, or ADM. This is literally the beating heart of the entire framework. It's a multi-phase, iterative approach used to develop the architecture and actively shake and govern business transformation. It is definitely not a one-and-done process. It's a continuous engine of improvement.
All right, now that we know what drives the framework, let's move to part 3. We're going to look at how we divide this massive master blueprint into manageable layers, which are known as the 4 architecture domains.
To make enterprise architecture actually achievable, the framework traditionally divides it into these 4 specific buckets: the business domain, the data domain, the application domain, and the technology domain. By breaking our massive city down into these distinct specialized layers, we can actually wrap our heads around the complexity without getting totally overwhelmed.
So, Layer 1 is business architecture. This gives us a holistic view of business capabilities, value delivery, and organizational structure. It's where we relate all the moving parts back to our overarching business goals. Basically, it's the why and the who of our city.
Then we see how this builds into our second layer, data architecture. You can think of this as the nervous system of our metaphorical city. It describes the structure of the enterprise's logical and physical data assets. It dictates exactly how vital information flows and is managed across the entire organization.
Next up is application architecture. And this brilliantly illustrates how we bridge the gap between our business needs and our data. It describes the structure and interaction of the actual software applications that provide our key business capabilities and manage those vital data assets. It's the machinery doing the day-to-day work.
Finally, we've got technology architecture. This is the literal physical infrastructure. We're talking the hardware, the software, platforms, the tech services that support the applications, store the data, and ultimately enable the business to function. It's the concrete foundations, the power grids, and the fiber optic cables of our city.
Moving right along to Part 4, States, Gaps, and Roadmaps. You see, architecture isn't just about documenting where we are right now. It's about how we move an organization from where it is today to where it needs to be tomorrow.
The standard defines a really clear conceptual journey for this. We always start with a baseline architecture. That's the formally agreed upon current state of things. Then, we identify the gap. What's missing between today and our goal? From there, we move through temporary transition architectures and eventually arrive at our designated future target architecture.
But how do we actually navigate those stepping stones? Well, with a roadmap. A roadmap is an abstracted plan for business or technology change. It operates across multiple disciplines and usually spans multiple years. It's our long-term navigation chart, ensuring we actually reach that target architecture safely and efficiently.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Part 5, Building Blocks and Artifacts. We're zooming all the way in now. We're shifting from the macro-level city view right down to the tangible, reusable pieces we use to construct our designs.
A building block is exactly what it sounds like, a potentially reusable component that can be combined with others to deliver architectures and solutions. These are our fundamental construction materials. Depending on where we are in the planning process, they can be anything from a simple high-level outline to a fully decomposed technical specification.
To really wrap our heads around building blocks, we have to grasp the difference between logical and physical concepts. In this framework, logical means implementation independent. It's the abstract idea, the requirement itself. Physical, on the other hand, means real-world and tangible. It's how we move from the abstract concept of wanting a doorway to specifying a physical oak door with brass hinges.
Now, what's really interesting is how that logical versus physical concept applies directly to our building blocks. We have architecture building blocks, or ABBs, which are logical. They specify what's required on a supplier-independent level. Then we have solution building blocks, or SBBs, which are physical. The SBB is the actual implementation-specific component that realizes the plan set out by the ABB. So it's the plan versus the actual product used.
And as we document all of these building blocks and roadmaps, we create artifacts. Simply put, an artifact is an architectural work product that describes an aspect of the architecture. It's the tangible documentation, the diagrams, the lists, the matrices that formally captures our planning so we can communicate it clearly across the entire enterprise.
Finally, we need someone to make sure all these rules are actually followed, which brings us to architecture governance. This is the practice of monitoring and directing all architecture-related work. Think of governance as the city council. They ensure that all the building blocks and artifacts actually adhere to our overarching blueprints, principles, and roadmaps, so we deliver the outcomes the business truly needs.
Which leads us to our final question for you. How will you use these building blocks to map the future of your own enterprise? We've decoded the foundational terminology of the TOGAF standard today, translating a really dense glossary into a clear blueprint. Now, it's your turn to take these concepts, the iterative ADM, the 4 domains, the logical and physical building blocks, and apply them to organize and evolve your own architectural landscape. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep building.